Okay, well, thank you very much. Well, thanks for the invitation. Well, actually, I was asked to talk about the interrelation between energy, space, what was it? What was the third dimension? Mobility, and the impact that climate change and well, the limitations to the fossil fuels would have on this interrelation. This actually, I think, came out of a talk that I gave 3 years ago already at the ASPA conference in Vienna. If you are interested about this topic, I can highly recommend you to have a look at YouTube because it was, well, you'll find it there. But I must say that, well, in the meantime, my professional situation has changed a bit. At that time, I was, well, the coordinator of a research project at the university, working with Peter Droege, who's an expert on sustainable urban development. Well, then I moved to AIT, and I'm still actually working on the topics, but the focus, of course, has changed. So I've also changed a bit, well, the topic of my talk today. And I call it, well, as energy, space, and mobility are interlinked. This is a fact, and I think it's becoming, well, clearer and clearer. Well, what are the challenges for cities to become, well, smart and resilient? Of course, well, we all know that cities are, well, key in, well, stimulating, so to say, the energy transition from fossil fuels and from nuclear power to renewable energy, because they consume so much energy and because they have also a certain potential to generate new fuels, well, renewable fuels, if you want. And of course, we also know that cities are, of course, well, vulnerable to climate change impacts. But there's, of course, different, well, ways how we can look at this. You have, well, I think the previous project that I've just been talking about was about, well, resilience, basically. So about, well, how to mitigate climate change effects and at the same time, how to, well, stimulate the energy transition. What we have at the moment, of course, is a very active discussion on the smart city, so on how to make cities, well, resource efficient, how we can raise the quality of life, and how we can, well, make them inclusive places. These are, of course, in a way, well, two sides of the same medal, but still I think you have different stakeholders involved in the two discussions. The first on resilience is, of course, very much something that you discuss in academia, that you discuss in universities. You have some, well, civil society organizations working on that. What we are more into as applied researchers is, so to say, well, working in the field with cities, working with industry, working with utility companies on, well, achieving some change, maybe not in 30 years until 2050, but maybe within the next 10 years. Well, this is actually, I think, what the smart city debate basically is about. So what I think interesting about the two debates actually is that there's a growing perception that it's more and more difficult to differentiate between an energy system and a mobility system and the built environment, because well, as the renewable energy generation in cities is becoming more and more important, these, well, three domains are actually merging step by step. And this is also, well, has been reflected by several people, for example, by well, the European Innovation Partnership on Smart Cities and Communities, who produced that nice diagram, which is not, I think, conceptually, well, 100% convincing, but at least it shows that, well, mobility and the built environment and also the ICT infrastructure should be, well, perceived in the future and also from now on as actually one domain. So what are the challenges that, well, cities or also planners, if you want, should bear in mind when they are working on, well, short-term to medium-term change in cities? I think it's basically, well, you have to think of 5 levels of integration, and this is also what I think should link this talk to your design that you will start from, I think, today on, or from the weekend on. I think, well, the 5 levels have design implications, some about the design of spaces, some about, well, other forms of design. Of course, you can also design processes. And I would just like to, well, share my views on that with you. First of all, well, the built environment is a very good level of integration. This is what we basically talk about if you talk about, well, mixed use in cities, or if we talk about, well, integrated land use planning, if we talk about the integration of renewables into the built environment. This is, so to say, the classical way how to, I would say, conceptualize, well, the integration of different domains, different demands in a city. Well, you should do that by developing good plans, good projects. The second, and this is something that is now, I think, becoming more and more important, is of course the integration in a way of technologies. We know that, well, there are new technologies emerging, and those are, well, some of them, or many of them, are very well relevant in order to tackle, well, to mitigate, well, climate change. Well, I think what we can see is that, as I said, certain domains at the moment merging. Also, we have, so to say, the view on the energy system and also on the mobility system, well, mostly on the energy system, I think is changing from a more static view, where you looked on, you know, the energy consumption, the energy generation per annum, to something more dynamic. And that also opens up, well, new collaboration with the field of mobility, as, for example, the integration of electric vehicles into energy supply networks is something that, well, a lot of research is being done on at the moment, and also, well, you see first applications out in the field. Well, just one example that I would like to highlight here is a project at AIT, not myself, but well, our smart grid colleagues did in the province of Salzburg, actually. A smart grid model community was developed in a village called Köstendorf, in which, well, you have, so to say, a smart grid that is powered by, well, a very high share of PV. There you have, of course, well, a lot of fluctuation between the energy generation throughout, well, depending on the weather conditions, and you have a mismatch between demand and supply, well, temporarily. And electric vehicles, among other things, were used in order to balance the grid. Yeah? I think the third challenge, which is also coming up at the moment more and more, is the integration of data. Well, I think you know that there's, you know, many industrial players at the moment pushing into the smart city debate, mostly I think because, or many of them are interested in the things that you call the Internet of Things, that is also being linked at the moment to mobility topics, to energy topics. And, well, apparently they think that, or they expect big business there. Siemens here in Vienna is one of them, who does a lot, has a research group working on, well, real-time monitoring of energy and also of transport infrastructure. Well, there's prototypes out there already. It's not, I think, on the market, but this is something that I think where we will see, at least on the, so to say, on the management side of networks of energy and transport systems, well, some technological innovation, at least in the upcoming years. Related to this, there's also, of course, some criticism out on, well, you'll have many sensors out in the world, many potential spies. What will happen to the data? Of course, this is, well, something that has to be, I think, solved by regulation in the end. The good side of that might be that there will be more open data sets available, at least that's the idea behind, well, many projects in that field, that, well, the infrastructure providers or operators could provide some of the data that they collect to the public in order to, well, provide some opportunities for, well, IT companies or also for designers to use the data set for whatever they think would be useful. The fourth challenge, and I think that leads maybe, back to urban planning, is the process integration. Bringing these domains that you have out there and that were separate for quite some time, mobility, transport, the built environment, and so on, is something that actually the organizational structures of, well, public and also of private actors, I think, are not really prepared for. This is something that requires a lot of, you know, thinking how to reorganize public administrations, or at least, well, ensure that people talk to each other. And the same refers actually also to other big organizations, well, including, well, our own, I would say. We also have a mobility department, we have an energy department. Of course, we talk to each other. One colleague from the mobility department will join you tomorrow. But still, well, there are some barriers that we have to overcome and that we have to work on. And well, this is something that, for example, the city of Vienna at the moment is also, well, discussing how to implement this very ambitious framework strategy that has been adopted last year, well, across all departments. And this is also something where we are involved to a certain extent. Also, the colleagues from TINA are involved. This is an open discussion, and it's really hard work to get things rolling in this field. Yeah? Finally, I would also like to address that there's an integration of knowledge that also relates to the sectorial organization, I would say, and also the disciplinary, the traditional disciplinary, well, education system that you, of course, well, you have at the moment. You have transport engineers, you have energy engineers, you have urban planners, you have social scientists, you have economists that, well, to a certain extent, of course, yes, have already talked to each other in the past, but there's a need of a much stronger interlinkage and of much more interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary well, collaboration than we have been used to. And well, this is also something that maybe just leads to back to our own work. I think very useful platforms that are also well funded at the moment from the European Commission and also nationally are, so to say, well, demonstration projects in which are used as test beds for, well, developing new solutions on the technological side, but also developing new processes, new structures, how to, for collaboration. Well, there are some projects, of course, already running in Vienna, in Aspern, for example. We were also involved in a European application, which, well, we will get the information about that, if it succeeded or not, on the 8th of October. And this, so it's, in the end, well, there's a lot of work on smart cities and urban transformation done in living labs in a way, if you want. So as a summary, I think, well, you could think of, well, a triple I approach to smart and resilient and sustainable cities. I think we need a new way of thinking that includes, well, innovation, of course, technological innovation, social innovation, process innovation, interdisciplinarity or even transdisciplinarity, and also, well, a much stronger focus on integration and on, well, thinking across well, departmental and disciplinary boundaries. Thank you very much. Once again, many thanks for the invitation. All the best for your designs. And of course, I'm eager to take your questions. Thank you. Thanks again.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think we have time for 2, maximum 3 questions. Is there somebody who has an immediate question? I would have a question with the process integration. Where do you see the relationship between like design and research here? Like how can we better talk to each other?
Mine works. Okay. Well, there's a lot of, well, talking about, well, co-creative design process at the moment. So that means actually that designers and users should talk to each other. And of course, this I think can be supported by research. That would be one possibility. Also, yeah, I think it's a matter of organization. Of course, it makes sense to create in design processes certain, you know, interfaces to research activities. So I think this is one potential interface. On the other hand, of course, I think it would also bring some, you know, added value to research if you would include designers in certain steps, because design basically is about holistic thinking, and research is, well, very often very focused on details. So I think this is also something where, you know, mutual inspiration should arise. This is my phone, sorry.
Okay, I'll test it again if there's any feedback. One more chance for a question, otherwise we jump to the next speaker. And I'll just drop the mic. So, Josh, you had a question?
Well, so part of the question that we were asking that you had mentioned in the beginning was this relationship between energy, space, and mobility. Yeah. As we're looking at all of these sort of new ways of thinking and trying to be more innovative, how much does the idea that less energy will mean that we have maybe decreased mobility and much greater localness in our understanding of space? how much does this enter? Or like the question that I mentioned before, the trajectory that we've come to assume is normal is one of bigger, better, faster, more. How much of the opposite is entering the conversation with this stuff?
It has entered the conversation, of course. I think you shouldn't separate the two things. In fact, I must say there is a certain separation. That has a lot to do with who is involved in which discussion, of course. So this is something I think we should work on. Also, unfortunately, this has something to do with the way research is funded. Because, well, if you go for an applied research project, the funding agency actually expects you to hand in a ready-made plan, and then they say, well, and now you put on top of this plan, you put the nice innovative technology. That, from a planning perspective, that doesn't make any sense. You should think about the innovative aspects of the technology from the very beginning on, yeah? And also involve the technical experts if you want. I think that leads to a good design result. But unfortunately, the funding agencies don't really care about the design aspects. They wait for the ready-made plan, and then they say, well, and now you do it the smart way. Yeah? That's a bit frustrating. I think this is something that should be enhanced, but this is unfortunately how it is at the moment in many projects.